interesting thing about ALS is everyone assumes there's no treatment whatsoever because there's no cure. But there are no cures for lots of things we see in medicine, but there are treatments, and there are treatments for ALS. So I usually talk about three major problems that the patients get into: a breathing problem, a swallowing problem, and a falling problem. Well, the most important one is fixing the breathing problem, where patients have a great deal of difficulty. And what we do for that, it's called BiPAP, or bi-level positive air pressure. Everyone knows what CPAP is for sleep apnea. CPAP stands for continuous positive air pressure. They open up the back of the throat with the continuous air. But for ALS, it's not opening up the back of the throat, it's expanding the chest and getting the lung to expand that's important. So when you put on a mask and it's attached to a machine, and the machine takes a big breath when you breathe in, then you try and breathe out, and the machine breathes in a little bit. It's 2 levels of positive air pressure, and that expands the lungs. And it turns out, when you put this on at night, when you're sleeping, and you have difficulty lying flat because of ALS, because your lungs don't expand because of the motor neurons are compromised, if you use this, our patients are doing considerably better, sometimes as much as 30% better, and this will prolong their lives. More importantly, it gives them a quality of life very, very quickly. Sometimes it's difficult to get used to the mask, but it really helps. The second problem, that of swallowing, you change the diet. You don't want thin liquids, you want thickened liquids. You want applesauce, you want to crush your pills, you want to make sure that you use a pudding consistency diet. All of these can make a difference, and our patients live longer. The people who do the best for ALS are the people who weigh the most. So this is a way of maintaining your weight, of getting nourishment in. If you get to a point where you're still having difficulty, we can put in a tube called a gastrostomy tube, and that allows us to get feedings in, and our patients can go for years that way. The third problem, falling. If you fall, that's trauma, and trauma can excite the inflammatory system, and you do worse. So, walkers, canes, any means of stopping falling will benefit the patient. You put all three together, and you've provided a meaningful improvement in the quality of life, and that's treatment, and it's important treatment that is allowing our patients to live twice as long as they did 10 or 15 years ago before we used all of these interventions. From the point of view of therapy, we've got to divide the population into those patients who have a genetic form of the disease, which is 10% of the patients, versus the 90% that have what we call the sporadic form of the disease that does not run in families. Now, having discovered some of the causes of the gene defects, one prominent one of which is called superoxide dismutase, SOD, we've learned in animal models how to shut down the production of this mutant protein, and this is now being tried in man with 2 forms of therapy. One is called antisense oligonucleotides. It shuts off the production of the mutant SOD protein. And the other is called RNAi, or inhibitory RNA, so that you no longer produce. The latter is being now tested in animal models, looks very promising, and will reach man. The antisense oligonucleotide, I think, looks very, very exciting and is an important way to go. So that's one form of therapy for the genetic. What about all the other cases that don't have a single gene? Well, there are several studies in various countries, some have been accomplished here, with what we call cell-based therapies, that is, various cells that you take out of the bone marrow or out of the fat pad called mesenchymal stem cells, and using them in patients. There's some promise. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fraudulent groups that are trying to sell this, and that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about the legitimate scientific-based studies that suggest there may be something there. Is it a therapy yet? No. Is it ready for prime time? It's getting closer, but this is another form of therapy. Then we can switch to other studies, some of which involve shutting down the activated macrophages, the circulating cells in your blood that are spewing forth toxic substances. And there are studies with this form of therapy. This is called NP001 that is presently being tested. There are other therapies, ones coming over from Japan, that deal with the free radical stress that we know exists, that is approved in Japan, that will be used, hopefully in the near future, in the States. The FDA has to rule on this. But every therapy we know that is going to be meaningful is in fact a therapy that's been tested in a double-blind, scientifically proven manner that the FDA and all of us would accept. The important reason, and people sometimes say, why do we need to wait for the FDA to approve it? And the reason is, we have done studies. As a matter of fact, the last several studies we did, the patients on the sugar pill did better than the patient on the experimental therapy. So you don't want to just rush in and try anything, because you might do worse with that than, in fact, if you took nothing, or if you just took vitamins or things like that to help. But we're at a great time. There are more potential therapies that are in the pipeline that we think are going to be very meaningful. From our own group here at Houston Methodist, we're studying a population of immune cells called regulatory T cells, and we have some very promising data along these lines. This is still in the scientific inquiry stage, but we're excited that the potential may be there. So whether it's small molecules, whether it's cell-based therapies, or whether it's shutting off the genes, this is one of the most exciting times we've ever had for the therapy of ALS. When the question is asked of me, I tell folks that there are several kinds of harm. You can have physical harm, which is the only thing that people think about from an experimental therapy. Is it doing any physical harm? Well, most of the supplements that folks come in with and everything, we know are not doing physical harm. You can have financial harm. There are people out there who are gouging our patients, charging them huge sums of money. And when you charge them huge sums of money, this is depriving their families and their loved ones of vacations, of trips, of bread and butter on the table, and this is a real concern because they might not be worth it. And the third is what I call emotional harm, and that is, how many different things can you try before you say, I'm going to give up? And we don't want our patients giving up. They usually don't give up. So are these therapies, these experimental approaches, harmful in any of these three categories? That's an important question. From our point of view, if it's not harmful, I don't have any problem with it. However, I'm concerned that life is not that easy, that there's something out there that is proven to work, only we haven't been able, as physicians at big medical centers like Houston Methodist, to prove that. That's really hardly the case. Could there be opportunities like that as we go forward? Sure. But let's make sure that people are going to the right doctors with the right sophistication, with the right expertise, who will help them deal with the good side, the potential benefit, and the bad side, the kinds of harm that I've described.